Hey, so I got a really interesting comment on a video I put out titled Where to Start with Nietzsche. And I wanted to just do a quick video response. I really like this comment because the viewer is actually pushing back against against ideas that Nietzsche had, which is an extremely important part of, studying and reading philosophy as a philosopher, is to think critically about the ideas that are being presented. I definitely appreciate comments like this. So I'll just read the comment really quick, and then I wanted to maybe try and answer at least one of these questions. How could Nietzsche even begin to suggest that evil doesn't exist? Under what circumstances could he suggest that murder isn't evil? A guy breaks into a shop to steal something and ends up shooting someone. How can this not be evil? Beyond this, no man is an island. Every artist builds on the work of others. Every achievement has a community of many who supported, though maybe indirectly, all great achievements. While I love being able to use Nietzsche's work as a starting point into philosophy, the implications of this, though, seem very bad. Evil? Leading to freedom without responsibility, a key plague of our modern, apathetic culture. So what I want to do here is maybe just talk a little bit about trying to answer the question, exactly what is Nietzsche's argument for supposing that, as they put it, that evil doesn't exist. And keep in mind, of course, anything Nietzsche says about evil, he's also saying about good, because Nietzsche is an amoralist, not an immoralist. So he rejects the notion of morality entirely, good and evil. Not existing is one way of putting it. I would just refine that just slightly by saying that what Nietzsche views in terms of morality is that the notions of good and evil are just that. They are just notions. So to whatever extent they exist only as thoughts in our mind. They don't exist objectively, meaning independent of our mind. So how does Nietzsche arrive at this view? Well, this all follows from his particular reading of the history of morality. The way Nietzsche looks at morals is he looks at them as ideas that have not always been with us, but were introduced at some point in human history, and over time we just sort of accept them as objective fact. Taking the example that this viewer uses of someone going into a store and committing a robbery and a murder, what are the objective facts we can say about that scenario? Well, objectively, there was something in the store that was stolen, and there was someone in the store who was at one time alive and now not so much. These are the facts of the situation. Maybe we could include the whys and wherefores. The object is no longer in the store because it was stolen. The person in the store who was murdered because the person stealing murdered them. All those are the objective facts of the situation. Nietzsche would say, where in this world can you point to something and say, there is the goodness of it? There is the evilness of it. In the same way that I can go outside and touch one of the trees and feel that it's cold, because it's very cold today. That's objective truth. Or that's an objective quality. That's something that is true. The tree is cold whether or not I'm touching it. I'm not just making it up. It definitely is very cold out today. That's objective reality. Where can I go outside and find goodness? Where can I go outside and find evil? Is one way we could formulate Nietzsche's question. But basically, if it is true that ideas called good and evil arose over time and were something that people themselves created, then Nietzsche says, well, then they're not objectively real. They are just thought objects. They're things that we come up with in our minds. Now, someone can totally disagree with Nietzsche in that respect, but the way to do that is not to appeal to the very thing Nietzsche is calling into question. Like, we can't say, Nietzsche says there is no good and evil, and our response is, well, yes, there is. I mean, you could, but that wouldn't be a substantial counter argument to what Nietzsche says. So, is there another way we can go about this? Well, one of my criticisms of this line of thinking, which is not at all unique to Nietzsche, this is something that we see in Foucault, who was heavily influenced by Nietzsche. Prior to Nietzsche, we kind of see a sort of a variety of this in Thomas Hobbes. Basically, there's this idea that many philosophers have that morals, first of all, are not real in the sense that, it's cold outside is real, and that they emerged or were created by people for particular reasons. For Foucault, it's all about power relations. For Thomas Hobbes, it's all about keeping people from eating each other, basically. For Nietzsche, there's a few different explanations he has for why morals arise in the first place, why we come up with them at all. One of them is basically coping, a psychological self-trickery that we do, something he calls slave morality, where he looks at particularly the Christian religion, which emphasizes things like humility, meekness of spirit, not, causing trouble, turning the other cheek, all that stuff. And Nietzsche thinks that the reason people developed those ideas, which obviously Nietzsche is assuming that these ideas don't come from God, they do in fact come from people on his view. And the reason he thinks so is because people don't feel like they can cope with the fact that they're disempowered. And so they kind of do this self-trickery kind of thing, this cope that they do, where they convince themselves, well, the reason that we're in this position, maybe we're in a lower position in society, is because God has something bigger planned for us later. Just as Jesus said, the first will be last and the last first, all that good stuff. Notice, of course, that all of this turns on a lot of pretty big assumptions. Nietzsche is beginning his philosophy pretty far down the road. He's already decided that there is no God. Pretty big assumption. Doesn't really give much argument for why there is no God in his work. Doesn't seem to think he needs to, which is perhaps the thing that irritates me the most, because that's just not acceptable in philosophy. To just make a bold claim like that and treat it as, well, duh, that's not really how philosophy works. Another problem that I have, not just with Nietzsche, but with anything falling under the heading of so-called existential nihilism, is this, what I think is a false dichotomy between subjective perceptions and objective facts about the world. And this is something I've talked about in other videos. The example I use is a mirage. Somebody is wandering around in the desert for many days. They're hungry and hot and thirsty, and they see this hallucination of an oasis, palm trees, body of water, all that stuff. At that moment, that is not real for that person in this scenario. It's a hallucination that their mind is projecting onto the world. But it is a fact that there are bodies of water in the real world. The fact that that person is hallucinating that particular image at that moment doesn't mean that there are no actual bodies of water in the actual world. Therefore, there are these things that are not exactly neatly divided into, okay, this is objective and this is what we project on the world. Well, don't we project onto the world precisely that stuff that we observe in the world? And don't the things that we project onto the world very often come into being? I mean, how would anything ever get done if that weren't the case? I mean, this house that I'm in at some point did not exist. It existed only in someone's mind. Thank goodness it exists in reality now, because otherwise I would be out there in the freezing cold. So I don't really like this sharp dichotomy that existential nihilists place between objective and subjective. And there's a lot of work being done lately in this field of trying to, of stitching the objective and subjective together. There's a lot of interesting writing being done on that maybe that distinction is not so sharply divided as we might think. Of course, all these objections, criticisms, are mostly negative, meaning I'm picking things apart in Nietzsche. I'm not really adding my own views. I'm not trying to say I have a better idea. That is an option. You're more than welcome to create your own philosophy or your own views about morality and say these are better than Nietzsche's for these reasons, X, Y, and Z. I just for this video, I'm choosing not to do that. I'm choosing to try and focus on some of the criticisms that people might raise about Nietzsche's philosophy. So, kind of, to wrap things up, I really appreciate comments like this where people are engaging critically with the ideas that I'm presenting and that the ideas of other people that I'm talking about. That's part of what makes philosophy what it is. It's supposed to be a mode of thinking that is different from our normal everyday way of thinking so that we can produce new, interesting ideas that we wouldn't have come up with otherwise. That's the whole point. So this is awesome to see, people thinking critically and not just accepting blindly because somebody's name is on a book. Well, they must have great ideas. Well, maybe, maybe not. One final point, though, I want to make is that regardless of whether someone agrees with Nietzsche or not, the fact of the matter is he is one of the most influential philosophers of the last 100 years or so. And so understanding some of the movements in 20th century philosophy, like existentialism, like postmodernism, again, whether you agree with those or not, understanding how those movements arose and what assumptions are kind of underpinning them, it's very important to work with Nietzsche, at least try and understand what he's saying and why he's saying it. I'm not sure if I made it clear or not that he was my intro to philosophy. It just happens to be the case that over time, as I was exposed to more, different thinkers, that started to, develop my own views on Nietzsche's thought. And that's what's supposed to happen. In fact, that's what I think Nietzsche himself would like to see. Nietzsche was a free spirit. That is for sure. And I don't think Nietzsche would like his philosophy to be taken, uncritically. Um, you know, but yeah, so I hope someone got something out of that. I hope this answers some of those questions, and definitely feel free to keep this dialogue going. I really like hearing from viewers what their thoughts are on the material that we're covering on this channel. So that makes this, that's what this is all about. So thanks a lot, and everybody take care.